The New York Times sent David Gelles to cover the story. That decision, by itself, tells you something. Gelles is not a weather reporter. He is the Times climate correspondent. The journalist whose job is to cover not the daily temperature, but the decades-long transformation that produces it. When the Gray Lady dispatches its climate correspondent to a heat wave in late May, it is because the editorial judgment at the most influential newspaper in the world is that what is happening to Europe right now is not a weather story. It is a climate story. And the sentence at the center of what he found, the sentence that has been quoted in science briefings, UN statements, and parliamentary testimony since it was published, came not from a politician or a policy document, but from Professor Friederike Otto of Imperial College London, one of the world's foremost experts in climate attribution science. The sentence was this: this record-breaking heat has the fingerprints of climate change all over it. Not some of the fingerprints, not traces, all of them. Understanding exactly what that means, what it means scientifically to say that fingerprints of climate change are present in a specific weather event, is the work that David Gelles and his sources did across the reporting of this story. And it is work worth understanding properly because the phrase is used frequently in climate coverage without always being explained with the precision it deserves. Climate attribution science is a specific and relatively recent discipline. It emerged from theoretical possibility to practical application in the early 2000s, and its development has been one of the most significant advances in applied climate science of the past 2 decades. The core question it attempts to answer is not whether climate change is real or whether it is warming the planet. Those questions have been settled science for decades. The question attribution science asks is specific. For this particular weather event, in this particular location, during this particular period, how much did human-caused climate change alter the probability and the intensity of what occurred? The answer, expressed as a probability ratio, is what the fingerprint metaphor describes. When scientists say the fingerprints of climate change are all over an event, they mean that the attribution analysis shows the event's probability and intensity to have been materially altered by anthropogenic warming, to a degree that is statistically distinguishable from what natural climate variability alone would have produced. Professor Friederike Otto is the scientist who, more than any other individual, built the methodological framework for real-time climate attribution. She co-founded the World Weather Attribution Consortium, which conducts rapid attribution analyses of extreme weather events as they occur, a process that once took up to a year and now takes days to a week. When she says the May 2026 European heatwave has the fingerprints of climate change all over it, she is not offering an opinion or a rhetorical flourish. She is describing the output of the analytical process she spent her career developing, a process whose methodology has been peer-reviewed, replicated, and applied across hundreds of extreme weather events globally. Her assessment of the May 2026 event is consistent with the attribution findings the World Weather Attribution Consortium has produced for every major European heatwave since 2003. That climate change made the event more likely, more intense, or both, by a factor that is large and statistically significant, and that, in the most extreme cases, the event could not have occurred at all in a climate without anthropogenic warming. The specific numbers from the May 2026 European heatwave that provide the physical basis for Otto's fingerprint assessment are extraordinary in their own right. Euronews published the comprehensive data picture on May 28, 2026, drawing on meteorological analysis from multiple European weather services and the World Meteorological Organization's rapid response reporting. Dozens of European cities witnessed temperatures far above their climatological normal highs for late May. London recorded temperatures 16 degrees Celsius above its historical average for the period, not above the previous record, above the average. Paris was 14 degrees above its seasonal average. Even typically cooler regions like Oslo experienced temperatures 3 degrees above late May averages. The heat dome that produced these anomalies was described by weather forecasters as highly anomalous and powerful, an atmospheric pattern that locks in heat waves and is becoming more frequent due to human-caused climate change. The pattern itself is not new. Heat domes form over Europe periodically. What is new is the temperature of the air the pattern works with. Air that is now warmer than it has been in any comparable period of human civilization, carrying the thermal legacy of more than a century of greenhouse gas accumulation in the atmosphere. The World Weather Attribution methodology that Professor Otto applies quantifies this legacy in terms that policymakers and the public can use. For the 2023 European heatwave, an earlier precedent event, the consortium found that the extreme temperatures across southern Europe and North Africa could not have happened without the continuing buildup of warming gases in the atmosphere, making the event virtually impossible in a pre-industrial climate. The May 2026 event has not yet received its formal attribution report. Those take days to a week for complex multi-country events, but the scientific framework within which that report will be produced already provides a directional answer. A heat wave that pushed temperatures 16 degrees Celsius above the late May average in London, that broke the UK's all-time May record by 2 degrees, that simultaneously produced record temperatures across France, Ireland, Germany, and the Benelux countries, and that arrived at least 6 weeks ahead of the climatological peak of the European heat season, sits at the extreme end of what natural climate variability could conceivably produce. The attribution analysis will quantify by how much climate change increased the probability of this specific event. The fingerprints that Professor Otto identified do not need to wait for that quantification to be visible. They are written in the 2-degree margin by which Britain's 82-year May temperature record was broken, and in the 16-degree departure from seasonal norms that London recorded on the same afternoon. The United Nations Secretary-General's response to the May 2026 European heat wave added a dimension to the story that Gels developed in his reporting. The connection between the fossil fuel economy that drives the climate change producing these events and the clean energy alternative that both reduces future risk and delivers immediate economic benefits. Simon Steele, the UN climate chief, used language that explicitly framed the heat wave as what he called a double jeopardy moment. His full statement, published alongside the Euronews Attribution reporting on May 28th, described the event as a climate-driven heat wave at a time when the latest war in the Middle East is showing the soaring costs of depending on fossil fuel imports. He added that the solutions are just as clear: a faster shift to clean power, which is now cheaper than fossil fuels and faster to produce, and hence is mission critical for energy affordability and nations' economic security. The UN Secretary-General's framing connects the attribution science to the policy response in a single paragraph. The climate change fingerprints that Otto identified are the product of fossil fuel dependence, and the same fossil fuel dependence is simultaneously producing the geopolitical and economic vulnerabilities that the clean energy transition addresses. The economic dimension of that argument is supported by data that arrived at the same time as the heat wave itself. An analysis by Solar Power Europe, cited in the same Euronews reporting, found that solar generation alone saved Europe €3 billion in March 2026 by reducing demand for gas imports. The same analysis projected that if gas prices remained elevated through the year, Europe's savings from solar generation could reach €67.5 billion by the end of 2026. This is not a projection about future clean energy economics. It is current year data showing that the transition to renewable energy is already generating quantifiable financial returns at continental scale. In the context of a heat wave that is itself the product of the fossil fuel economy, that the clean energy transition is designed to replace, the economic case presented by this data completes a circle that the political conversation has been slow to draw explicitly. The heat dome costs money in infrastructure damage and healthcare burden, in agricultural losses, in the human productivity lost to days when temperatures make sustained outdoor or uncooled indoor work physiologically dangerous. The clean energy transition saves money in avoiding fossil fuel import costs, in reduced long-term infrastructure damage, in the health costs of air pollution that accompanies fossil fuel combustion. The attribution science identifies the cause. The economics identify the solution. The gap between them is political will expressed as investment decisions. David Gell's reporting for the New York Times has consistently focused on exactly this gap between what the science says is happening, what the economics say should be done, and what the political systems of Western democracies are actually delivering. His work on the May 2026 heat wave exists in the context of a body of reporting that includes the World Economic Forum's annual climate finance discussions, where the gap between commitments and capital flows has been a recurring and unresolved theme, in the corporate net zero commitment landscape, where the distance between public pledges and measurable operational change has been extensively documented. The fingerprints of climate change that Professor Otto identified in the May 2026 European heat are not a discrete finding about a single weather event. They are the latest data point in a continuous record that Gels has been documenting for years, a record whose trajectory has not changed despite the volume and quality of the science communicating it. The human scale of what those fingerprints represent in the May 2026 event is the dimension that moves the attribution science from abstraction to consequence. 11 people died in water-related incidents during the UK heat wave alone. 9 of them children who went to water on hot days because the air temperatures around them were breaking records that had stood for 82 years. France reported 7 deaths directly or indirectly linked to the heat. Across Europe, the 2025 Summer's Attribution study found that approximately 68% of heat deaths during that season were attributable to climate change, meaning that for every 10 people who died in the 2025 European heat waves, roughly 7 would have survived in a climate without human-caused warming. The equivalent calculation for the May 2026 event will be made when the attribution analysis is complete. Its result will be another number, another fraction of the deaths that were not inevitable, but were produced by the specific warming trajectory that decades of fossil fuel combustion has delivered. The broader European death toll context that sits behind the May 2026 attribution reporting is one of the most important and least discussed dimensions of the climate crisis, as it is actually unfolding in real time. The 2025 European summer killed approximately 16,500 people from heat, a figure calculated by researchers who found that 68% of those deaths were attributable to climate change, meaning that roughly 11,000 of them would not have occurred without the additional warming that greenhouse gas emissions have produced. These are not projected deaths. They already happened. The 2022 European summer killed an estimated 61,000 people across the continent. The 2023 summer killed approximately 47,000. Each of those events had its attribution analysis completed, each found the same pattern of fingerprints, and each produced the same calls for faster decarbonization and adaptation investment from institutions whose recommendations have been met with commitments that consistently outpace the physical deployment of infrastructure. The May 2026 event is, in the context of that accumulated European summer death toll, not an anomaly or a surprise. It is the predictable output of a physical system that has been accelerating in a documented direction for decades. What is different about it, what makes it particularly significant as a data point in the attribution science record, is that it has arrived in May rather than July or August, compressed the timeline of European extreme heat risk by 6 to 8 weeks in a single event, and produced records that set 2 degrees above the previous mark rather than tenths of a degree. The fingerprints are not new. The depth of the impression they are leaving is. The most important sentence in the reporting from the May 2026 European heatwave is not the temperature record at Kew Gardens or the number of French towns that broke May records. It is the one that Professor Friederike Otto provided. Temperatures on this scale were once exceptional even a decade ago. The word once in that sentence carries the entire history of what has been lost. A decade ago, a heat wave that pushed London 16 degrees above its late May average would have been considered an event of extraordinary rarity, a statistical outlier in the distribution of possible May temperatures for a temperate maritime city. Today, it is happening. In May, before the summer solstice, 2 degrees above the record that stood since 1944. The fingerprints of climate change are all over it. They were all over the 2022 event. They were all over the 2023 event. They were all over the 2025 event. They will be all over whatever comes next. Science is not adding new information to the conversation each time a new record falls. It is confirming, with the redundancy of a record that is updated every summer, that the fingerprints have not been removed. They have not faded. They are, if anything, becoming more distinct with every degree of additional warming that the atmosphere accumulates. What David Gell's found is what climate scientists have been finding and documenting for decades. What makes 2026 different is not what was found. It is that the evidence is now visible on an ordinary afternoon in May, in a city that was dealing with snow on its surrounding moorlands less than 2 weeks before the record fell. The fingerprints were always there. In May 2026, they are impossible to miss.